some more.
Yo, what's good, people? Izzy Max here, back again, but this time it's a little different. This is a new segment we're going to be doing with the MDL, and this is going to be the MDL Pregame, where we're going to go over some of the matchups, some of the key things, and I keep saying we, and I am joined by the Blue Division host, one of them. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
So this is just something I kind of came up with. The whole point of this is to do a couple of things. We're not going to give our matchup predictions. We're not going to give, like, this team should bring this 6, blah, blah, blah. The whole point of this is to maybe help some more inexperienced coaches or some rusty coaches into what to look for while building, what to look for while building their own team, what to look for maybe what their opponent's going to be bringing, or just to give them information about teams that they're maybe not going to see until playoffs, or just stuff like that. So Dan, what do you think about kind of what we're going to be doing here?
I'm pretty excited about this kind of segment. Sort of, I'm not going to call it a deep dive into every matchup, but enough of a dive that we're looking at some of the more specific aspects of teams and how they match up into one another compared to the power rankings we both did recently, where we just sort of generally looked at the strength of a team as a whole.
Yep, and like I said, we're not doing this to influence any team building. I'm not going to talk about my match. Dan's not going to talk about his match. Luckily, I don't think we play each other in the regular season. And this will be done probably every Monday, Tuesday of every week. Kind of just giving a preview, just kind of looking for things that we should be looking out for. But without further ado, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and let you take the first one. And this is going to be against Matt and Hunter. What are your key mons that you've picked for this matchup?
Fantastic. So the key mons that I picked for this matchup are Diggersby and Metagross, and I think this is a really interesting matchup from Hunter's side specifically. If I'm remembering correctly, he has the week 2 bye, so this is really going to influence his first few weeks of the season, because he's either going into the bye having defeated the reigning champion, or he's going into the bye 0-1 and he doesn't get the opportunity for his first win until week 3. So it's a really high stakes game for him very early in the season. From Matt's side, I think the Diggersby is very important. I ran a couple calcs on this matchup, and a choice-banded Diggersby can OHKO Metagross if it's not Dynamaxed, even with max HP and max defense. So I think that that's going to be something that he has the potential to rely upon. I don't know if he brings it in the Rain matchup, but it is his strongest answer to Metagross in the Rain matchup, and also hits the Snorlax, which you have on your side. But from Hunter's side, this Metagross, I think, is a pretty obvious choice because I believe he brings it. He has it in the Rain. And from Matt's side, outside of the Diggersby, he doesn't have a whole lot that can really chunk it. So I think that that's sort of where the balance is going to be. Matt trying to get a Diggersby into position to chunk the Metagross, and Hunter trying to position the Metagross, at least in 1 or 2 of the games, around a potential Diggersby switch in to try and get the Diggersby down before the Metagross comes in. But what are your thoughts on this matchup?
So the 2 mons I picked, where you went more offensive, I went more defensive. I have Celesteela on Matt's side and Snorlax on Hunter's side. If you look at both sides of the matchup, there's really no way either team can deal with these if they get set up. So with Matt's side, with the Celesteela, all Hunter really has is some tech moves like Thunder Punch. And then he really doesn't have much outside of Vikavolt. And Celesteela does have the tools to deal with that mon. And then on the other side, when you look at Snorlax for Hunter, there is no real fighting type on that side. And Matt's team is primarily special. So maybe we see like a Curselax, or just a setup Belly Drum Lax next to that Amoonguss. And then maybe it maxes. I just think this game is going to be more defensive around these 2 mons, because neither team can really deal with one or the other. But if one gets set up before the other, I feel like that's really going to determine who comes out on top with this one. Like I said, if it's a Belly Drum Lax and a Belly Drum goes off, and Amoonguss is still around, or somehow Hunter is able to set up Trick Room with Behem, Snorlax just has a field day. Primarily, though, on the other side, if Celesteela gets set up, maybe with Iron Defense or with some special attack boost off Beast Boost, or maybe like a White Herb Power Herb Meteor Beam set, I just feel like Celesteela is going to steamroll in a different way. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know who's going to win this one because I do feel like it is so close between these two defensive mons that this is going to be one of the most exciting games to watch this week, I believe. It's really going to show good positioning, good team building, and just good tech all around. What do you think?
Absolutely. So this is also our first weather versus weather matchup. We've got a few of them this week, but this time they both have the rain. Who do you think actually wants the rain up more in this match, Matt or Hunter?
I'm going to go with probably Matt on this side, because on Hunter's side, yes, he has the rain and yes, he has the Metagross, but Hunter can tech more fire moves than Matt can. Matt is usually teching outside of Salazzle, maybe like a Thunder Punch or a Raw Thunderbolt off like Celesteela, and he also has the Raichu. Whereas Hunter, other than relying on that Vikavolt, you're relying on Fire Punch, maybe some Thunder Punches, but there's really not much in the terms of tech that Hunter can do to beat Rain on Matt's side.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. For me, I might actually lean towards Hunter wanting Rain a bit more because I do think the Kingdra has a plus matchup into Matt's Rain mode, but that makes sense as the tier 2 Rain sweeper versus 2 tier 3 mons on Matt's side. But the Kingdra does have a really tough time with Celesteela and to a lesser extent the Grimmsnarl as well. So I do think that this is going to be a pretty even matchup. I had them as number 5 and 6 in my power rankings, and I think the matchup will reflect that.
For sure. Okay, moving on. We now have a red division match between John and Hector. For the majority of the people, these were the two lower ranked teams. But for my picks in this, I really think it's going to be the two rock types that are going to be on showcase for both of these. The Regirock on John's side and the Aerodactyl on Hector's side. I do believe the Regirock is going to be harder to set up because it is going to rely on that Comfey setting our proccing policy and setting Trick Room. But if that does happen, there's really nothing on Hector's side that can really deal with the Regirock. You know, his top 6 mons plus Aerodactyl. Well, actually, there's only 3 mons that does not resist rock or ground, which your Regirock is going to cover. There's just really no answer to this Pokemon. On the other side, though, John also kind of struggles with Aerodactyl. He has a decently large flying weakness. Aerodactyl does also get ground coverage, and of course it is a rock type, so things like Mandibuzz, Aurorus, and Volcarona, they're not going to want to take those ground moves. So these are my two pivotal mons. It's going to be on John, I think, on this one to set up that Regirock before things get out of hand. Hector can kind of just have more of a free-flowing kind of strategy around the Aerodactyl if he so chooses, but that's how I kind of view this matchup. What do you think?
So I do think that John is going to have to set up something, but I'm not 100% sold that Regirock is the answer in this matchup, which is why I selected Comfey, because it could set up the Regirock, but I also think it has the potential to set up the Hitmonlee, which could be very good because Hitmonlee does get Rock Slide.
Yep.
And Hitmonlee with Rock Slide is going to be able to hit basically everything on Hector's team. Like, fighting and rock coverage just looks really good into a lot of what Hector has. And I believe Hitmonlee, it gets a lot of other potential coverage moves.
Yes.
So with that, I think the Comfey having the potential to set up either the Regirock or the Hitmonlee, and John's ability to play either fast or slow because of the Comfey makes it his most pivotal mon. If he does play fast, I'm very curious to see whether he brings the Suicune or the Mandibuzz, because they do fill very similar roles as Bulky, Tailwind, and Snarl. But on Hector's side, I think that this Klefki is going to be pretty key in this matchup, because a lot of the threatening damage from John's side is on the physical spectrum. The Regirock is on the physical spectrum, Rillaboom, the Hitmonlee, and I think the priority Will-O-Wisp that can come out of this Klefki does have the potential to really neuter John's damage, and I've thought his team is a bit low damage initially, generally speaking, and it would cause him to rely overly on Volcarona or something suboptimal, whereas the Regirock and the Hitmonlee would do a lot more damage, but they are very weak to priority from the Klefki.
Real quick, just check. Klefki does not get Will-O-Wisp, but it does get Screens.
Yes, Screens. Did I say Will-O-Wisp?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, but the Klefki setting up Screens does really neuter a lot of what goes on over there with his team. And also, if they set up, does Klefki get Foul Play? I want to say that it does.
Yeah, swag Play was huge when it first came out.
And I feel like that Foul Play with Screens can really neuter a lot of the physical damage that's coming out of John's side.
Yeah, now, correct me if I'm wrong, Hitmonlee can actually outspeed Regieleki if Unburden is procced, couldn't it?
So Regieleki's base speed is 200. And I can't remember what Hitmonlee's is off the top of my head, but I feel like it has the potential to outspeed Regieleki if it's procced.
This is I'm just gonna kind of ramble here, but this is something I actually want to check. So Hitmonlee's base speed is 87. So I don't believe it will be able to.
Okay, so then that Regieleki does have the potential to also just drop early Electro Web or also potential Screens, which could be very annoying. But with that in mind, Hector's really going to have to make sure that he does build the Eleki to outspeed a potential max speed Hitmonlee, because if he doesn't speed creep that and John decides to go for it, he could really be in for a bad day.
Oh, for sure. One thing I do kind of want to put out there, John does have priority Tailwind in the Fletchender, which potentially could be pretty big. I don't really see a way for Hector to set it reliably. I mean, he does have that Aerodactyl. But if John just leads maybe like a Fletchender, I don't know, Fletchender Volcarona, John might be able to just kind of start throwing off some huge hits. Because nothing really on John's team outside of that Charizard really wants to take a Heat Wave from Volcarona. So keep an eye out for that one.
One quick thing. I just pulled it up on a calc. A max speed Regieleki with Timid hits 277 stat, and a Timid Hitmonlee can hit 152. So with Unburden, Hitmonlee actually can outspeed Regieleki.
Interesting. Okay, well then that might actually be very big here in that matchup. So moving on, it's going to be you and Jess. So I do have to be careful with this one because I have seen some of Jess's prep. And of course, this is Dan's match, so he won't be talking too much on this. But the Mons I picked were Colossal and, Arctozolt. I'm going to start on Jess's side because the Arctozolt is probably a little bit more noticeable. It actually hits everything on Dan's team for super effective damage outside of Cofagrigus, Purloin, and actually that is it. Cofagrigus and Purloin are really the only two Mons that the Arctozolt can't hit for super effective damage, and I don't really think it is going to care too much about those two Mons. Of course, it does have the ice coverage for Tornadus, Garchomp, Tangela. It gets the electric coverage again for the Tornadus for the Primarina, and then it gets ground coverage in Stomping Tantrum for the Arcanine, Colossal, Copperajah, and the Luxray. Not really counting Diglett because it will die to whatever this thing throws out to it. But I just think having that many positive matchups, if she can get it in the Hail or somehow in Trick Room, I guess, or behind Tailwind, which I don't even think she can do. This Mon is actually, I believe, going to do a lot of damage if unchecked. And then alternatively, on Dan's side, I picked the Colossal. just because, again, it kind of has positive matchups into everything that Jess has on her team. Probably outside of Sanaconda and probably Wobbuffet. I have no idea. It's a Wobbuffet. But the problem with the Colossal is Dan's going to have to get it set up to where Jess does have the Incineroar for fake outs. There isn't anything to kind of nullify the redirect or to nullify the Aqua Jet. But you still have to be careful in like an Incineroar, maybe like an Incineroar Sanaconda lead or Incineroar Slowbro lead. There's a good potential that it doesn't go off, but if it does, I believe it's just kind of game over for this one. With that being said, I do believe that this is kind of a straightforward game. If either of these two Mons get set up and raring to go, I believe the game's going to be over on like turn 2. But that's my opinion. Dan, what do you think about your own matchup without revealing anything?
So I think that this is going to be one of the more exciting matchups this week. Jess and I matched up twice last season, once in the regular season and once in the playoffs. The regular season matchup was sort of my coming out party to show that I was actually going to be decent in this league and that physical Tapu Koko existed. And then the playoff matchup was, I'm probably biased, but one of the more exciting matchups that happened generally in the league.
No
where
bias.
We had some,
no bias. It was.
Yeah, we had some 1 HP survivals. We had some important crits.
RNG
really interesting
on
rolls.
both sides, yeah.
RNG on both sides. So I think Jess and I have some history of producing really good matches, and I really don't expect this one to be much different.
No, and I know you two on most power ranking lists have been separated by a large margin, but I think this match is going to be closer than that margin will tell you otherwise. So, moving on, Dan, it is your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're matched up with Burst, and Burst has said that he has identified a strong weakness in your team, and he's going to exploit it. But looking at the initial matchup, I'm not seeing it initially, so I'm very excited to see what he does with it. On your side, I do have the Toxtricity as the key mon in this matchup. In my breakdown of Burst's team, I said he is very weak to a strong special type poison attacker, and that's really the Toxtricity to a T. Toxtricity hits the Feeny, the Togetic, the Talonflame, the Morgrem, the Sceptile. It hits a lot of things really hard, and even the Urshifu, because of how bad Urshifu's special defense is, it's still going to get chunked by it. And that sort of leads into why I have Tapu Fini as the best potential matchup on his side, because he needs the Magnezone to deal with the Toxtricity. But what does Magnezone lose to? Blacephalon, and by a lot. So I think the Feeny is the most important thing because it will help to protect the Magnezone from the Blacephalon. So I think the way that he balances those two, Magnezone and Feeny, will really determine whether or not he gets sort of run over by a potential unchecked Toxtricity. And then if we look at the Sand Mode options that you have, like I think Sand Mode could come, but I don't think it's potentially as effective as sort of this Blacephalon Toxtricity combo and trying to exploit what I see as his biggest weakness in that triple fairy comp. But that's just my general thoughts on the matchup. Do you have anything without revealing what it is that you're actually planning on doing this week?
Not too much. This is gonna come down to, this is gonna sound weird, not so much come down to what I'm going to lead. It's gonna more come down to what Burst believes I'm going to lead. In my draft, one of the biggest things I wanted to cover was my lead matchups, because in VGC, you can really lose a game based on your lead. And so I built the team around that. I have wonderful lead options, and if he guesses it wrong, I feel like I can just win. And if he guesses it right, I feel like it's going to be more of a hard matchup. But yeah, that's kind of my thing. If he guesses my lead right, it's going to be a good game. If not toot my own horn, but I think I can run him over.
Yeah, I think this will be really telling this season because you guys were on the opposite ends of the spectrum, even more so than Jess and I when it came to the power rankings. So if Burst is able to pull what I imagine most people would consider to be an upset this week, it would be a very impressive feat and show that we've probably been really underestimating this team in general. So I am looking forward to seeing how this match plays out.
For sure, for sure. Moving back on to the both of us, we have Toxic and Dina. This is actually an interesting matchup because if you look at both sides of the team, outside of a better Trick Room mode for Dina, these two teams are very similar. They both have redirection with a very strong attacker and some really good support attackers and supporting Mons. Like I did say though, Dina does have the better Trick Room option, but for me, I kind of went for a cop-out and just picked the two offensive tier 1s, kind of clashing it out. This actually happened in Season 1 between me and Jess in top 4, and it was Dragapult versus Cinderace, and I had a real hard time working around the Dragapult, and I also had the Clefairy, but it was really hard to work around the Cinderace because of Sucker Punch. And Dragapult really can't one-shot the Cinderace reliably. So if Dean is able to take care of the Clefairy, Dragapult's going to have a real hard time, but I do believe these two are going to be the key mons in this matchup. Dan, what's up with you?
So I picked Clefairy and Clefable because I think a lot of what you're saying is true, and because of that, the person who loses their redirector first is going to be at a massive disadvantage.
Yep.
I do think the Cinderace with access to Max Steel Spike into Clefairy does threaten the opposing redirector more than Dragapult does. Like, there isn't a lot on Toxic's team that is going to be threatening a Clefable because he can't really set up to attack into it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the ability to protect on both of these while also having follow me threat, whoever plays better with their redirector and keeps it for longer is going to be the massive favorite in this match, because I do think that the redirection, both for these fast mode attacks and also for the potential Trick Room setup, the redirection is really going to be the key to this match and utilizing it properly.
Oh, for sure. And I do think Toxic is going to struggle with the Trick Room mode because his Trick Room option is really Reuniclus Frostmoth, but Dina's Trick Room option is Escav, Conkeldurr, Runerigus, and that just sounds way better. I know Reuniclus is really, really good, and I love Frostmoth, but it is a tad too fast for opposing Trick Room, and the Escav just kind of runs over the Reuniclus. So I'm excited to see kind of what Dina does more in prep, and I'm excited to see what Toxic does more in the battle.
Absolutely. And if Toxic does want to play into the Trick Room, I could see Iron Ball Magmortar actually making an appearance
maybe room
to try
service.
to, maybe room service as well, to try and get some damage on that Escav, because while Runerigus does threaten it a bit, Runerigus's defenses aren't fantastic, and I do think if Magmortar can get underneath the speed, I don't know the exact speed calcs on it with either Iron Ball or Room Service, he does have the potential to pull a surprise Trick Room mode that is very strong.
Yeah, and that brings me to a point I kind of want to talk about, because Room Service is one of those newer items that maybe some people aren't really familiar with, and Matt can attest to this because we've actually talked about it. Room Service is really, really good for kind of doing two things: outspeeding the slower things out of Trick Room and underspeeding them in Trick Room. So that's an item that didn't really see play last season outside of, I think I used it once on the Frostmoth. I think it was actually against you.
I don't know if we count that match.
But it's a very underutilized, underexplored item that I think actually could play a big role in this game.
Yeah, I could see room service really affecting the speed tiers so that the Magmortar always threatens the Escavalier. And if the Magmortar is threatening the Escavalier, then the Reuniclus has a good matchup into the Conkeldurr, and then together they can also threaten the Runerigus. So I do think that this Trick Room matchup is closer than it looks at the beginning, but again, that's where the redirector comes in, because if you're able to get one of those next to Clefairy or Clefable, that's an entirely different story.
For sure, for sure. Moving on, we have Grant and Dark. Go ahead, Dan.
So this is a weather battle, and I think we both agree with that in the mons that we're selecting here. Dark really needs to figure out a way to get the Hippowdon in when sun is up to get the Sandstorm in, while not letting Sableye be on the field. Because the priority sunny day into a Hippowdon switch would really just ruin his day.
Mm-hmm.
But he needs to maneuver the Hippowdon, and I think that's going to be his key to potential victory here. Because if he just lets that Venusaur sit in the sun, I don't really see a lot that his team can do with that. Because to threaten Venusaur in the sun, like, yeah, Chandelure does, but Venusaur can actually survive a lot of attacks from Chandelure depending on how it's built.
And it gets Earth Power.
And it gets Earth Power, and Sableye gets Quash.
Mm-hmm.
And Landorus exists.
Yep.
So I do think that this Hippowdon is going to be the key for Dark. And for Grant, I think he really is going to need to leverage the power of the Venusaur in the sun. Because while he does have more speed control options than Dark does, the Venusaur is still his most threatening thing in this matchup. Technically, the Dracozold's max airstream, if he's running a Hustle Dracozolt with Life Orb, that can do a lot to a Venusaur. But outside of that, there isn't a huge amount on Dark's team that is going to threaten the Venusaur. Like, even Togekiss going with a max airstream into a max Venusaur isn't going to do a huge amount, and Venusaur can always just max poison first if it's going first. So I think his Venusaur usage is going to determine how well he does this match, as opposed to the Hippowdon usage for Dark having to try and shut down the Venusaur with the ability on the Hippowdon. What do you think about the match, though?
For sure. So kind of the same thing, and pretty much all four mons that we picked here operate in the same thing. The Sableye is Grant's secondary Sunsetter, but I actually think it's potentially the primary one in this matchup. And then for Dark, I did pick the Dracozolt. It just hits a lot of Grant's team super effectively, other than that Landorus. But I do think Dark has other options to deal with that Pokemon. But I wouldn't be surprised to maybe see the sun is up and Venusaur's on the field with the Sableye. You're not going to expect the Hippowdon to come in. So maybe Hippowdon comes in and we have a Scarf Chandelure or something that really chunks the Venusaur, and maybe that can swing the tide of the weather war, because outside of Venusaur, there's really nothing to take advantage of the sun, to where Dark has other mons that like to be in the sand. You know, you got the Dracozolt, you also have the Lycanroc, and then you have things like Scizor not taking any damage, the Scizor not taking those boosted sun hits, Roserade again not taking those boosted sun hits. So like you said, Dan, this is going to be a very important weather match, but I do believe the weather is in Grant's favor. Just kind of seeing that Grant has more ways of setting his weather, to where Dark only has that Hippowdon and has to play it almost perfectly in order to kind of do what he wants to in that mode.
I would agree. The Sableye really is the trump card in the weather versus weather matchup, which is why I think Grant has the best weather mode, not just because Venusaur is the best weather sweeper, but because his ways to set it up are the strongest. Mm-hmm. But I think on top of that, a lot of Dark's team is hard to bring this week. Mm-hmm. Like, the Scizor is hard to bring, the Roserade is hard to bring, because bringing those into a sun matchup, if Ninetales clicks Heat Wave, they're both having a bad day, and if Venusaur has Weather Ball in the sun, that's basically a base 150 fire type move.
Yep.
Like, that's gonna do a lot of damage, and it becomes Max Flare if he maxes the Venusaur. Like, Venusaur with Max Flare is terrifying for a lot of the mons on this team.
Yeah, for sure. But anything can happen in a weather matchup, so
Absolutely.
I'm excited to see this one. And then moving on, oh, that's actually our last one. So Dan, what is your premier matchup for the week out of the ones we covered?
Not to toot my own horn, but it's me versus Jess, just because of the history that we've had in the matchups and some of the building I've done this week and the level of building that I know Jess can also consistently do. I think that this is going to be the must-watch TV for this week when it comes to excitement and quality of matches. And then with secondary notes to the Grant Dark matchup and the Hunter Matt matchup, because both of those feature trainers who have the bye week next week. So it will really influence their season going forward in an outsized way, how well they perform this week. And they both feature weather on weather matchups that are going to be pretty prominent this season, and it will be interesting to see how they play out.
Okay.
What about for you?
So mine is actually going to be the first match we covered, and that is the Matt Hunter matchup. Two tier 1 steel types, a Snorlax that's going to be hard to break, and they both have rain. This is going to come down to positioning, smart defensive plays, knowing when to press that offensive button. I just think this is going to be a really good matchup, and looking at the two teams, nobody has a clear advantage in this one. And then kind of the secondary matchup I am going to have is actually that Dan and Jess game. For most of the reasons you said, and also because in my eyes, I think people are kind of underestimating Jessica's cores, because I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, her types are weird, her cores are wonky. This isn't like a scary team like she has in the past, to where everybody knows your team is good. I think that she actually
ranked
has
11th once.
Well, okay, once. Let's not. I just think this is going to be key for Jess getting recognition this season, because she did draft a different team than what she's used to. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for us. This was super fun. I'm looking forward to doing these every week. Of course, this is week 1. We still have this whole week break. Matches do not start until actually, they start Saturday. So yeah, any last words before we wrap it up?
I'm just looking forward to this season and seeing what people are going to throw out week 1. I think there's a lot of good matchups and a lot of intrigue and team building for this first week, because it's the teams haven't hit the field yet, and this will be the first time to see how coaches are leveraging some of the more unorthodox choices, and that's always exciting.
Oh, for sure. One thing I do want to add, the next time we do this, which will be week 2, hopefully we can get this recorded probably around Monday or Tuesday before anybody really plays their games. There might be 1 or 2 played. We will start off with games that are going to be played that week, and then we will end with transactions. That is something else that we don't really get to talk about in the match breakdowns. But in something like this, we will talk about the transactions, kind of what they do for the team, and if we like them or dislike them. So that's going to be it for me. You good, Dan?
Yeah, this has been fun. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.